All right. Izzy and Ali, can you just keep letting people in? Sorry about the technical issues, guys. Eventbrite had got the wrong day and time, so you were all getting the meeting is over message. The meeting hadn't even started, but it's great that so many of you managed to find your way in. Liam is going to run the session, but I'm going to open with a karakia. So kia hora te marino, kia whakapapapunamu te moana, e huarahi mā tātou e te rangi nei, aroha atu, aroha mai, tātou e tātou katoa.
Tēnā koe tōta, and tēnā koutou katoa, nau mai, haere mai ki te hui nei, I te kaupapa o Pararopi. Tuatahi ngā mihi nui kia koutou ko tai mai ki kōnei, ki tēnei zui. Tuarua ngā mihi ki te Zero Waste Network, ina rā ko Daughter, koutou ko Ali, ko Izzy, mō te whakaritetanga o tēnei hui, tēnā koutou. Tuatoru, ko te wiki o te reo Māori I tēnei wā, nō reira, kia kaha te reo Māori. Nō reira, kia ora tātou, ko Liam Prince, toku ingoa, he tangata tiriti ahau, no Ingarani me Airani oku tipuna, he kai whakahaere au I the rubbish trip. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā rā tātou katoa. Kia ora everyone, so awesome to see so many of you here, lots of familiar faces and lots of new people from me as well, so thanks for coming. I'm really looking forward to the kōrero today on organic waste because it feels like organic waste feels like one of the biggest and easiest waste streams to deal with. But also for me, there's so much exciting potential for transforming our food systems and in turn supporting the creation of resilient, regenerative, healthy and equitable communities. So obviously lots of issues around organic waste that we'll get into. Things like climate change, government policy, also things like what sorts of systems are most appropriate for your communities, and how do we set up organic waste systems that achieve a wide range of social, cultural, environmental and economic outcomes beyond just diverting waste from landfill. Hopefully you had a chance also to read the Zero Waste Network organic waste discussion document. A lot of those issues, those key issues for us as a network are in that, so it's really worth a read. But before we get into any of that, just want to set the intention that one of the core objectives of today's session is really to understand how Zero Waste Network and all of us can support national collaboration on local organic waste enterprises and initiatives. Like, how do we work together? What kind of support is needed so that we can see more locally adapted and culturally appropriate systems for each of our communities. So that's the high level goal, but just a quick outline of how the session will run today. First, we're going to pass on to Jenny Marshall from the Ministry for the Environment, who's going to update us on the work that they've been doing around organic waste. Then we're going to hear from 3 members of the Zero Waste Network who run organic waste and composting enterprises. So we'll hear from Liz Stanway from Extreme Zero Waste in Whaingaroa, Raglan, then from Betsy and David Kettle from Hibiscus Coast Zero Waste, who will talk about their City to Farm initiative. And then we'll hear from Kate Walmsley from KaiCycle and Te Whanganui a Tara Wellington. After hearing about each of their projects, we'll open it up for a panel discussion. We've got a few pre-prepared questions, but we'd love to hear your thoughts and responses and questions to the speakers as well. And then after the panel, we're really going to open up the discussion into a workshop. We've got we've got 3 breakout rooms so we're going to go into, and we want to hear a range of ideas and issues and priorities from all of you around organics. Again, we've got some set prompts and questions, but we'll go over those when we get to it. We'll also be using Trello as a way of taking notes for the workshop. So you can either contribute to that directly or else we should have some people taking notes at each breakout room that can record your ideas. Okay, so that's our session today. So I will start off by handing over to Jenny Marshall. So Jenny Marshall is a senior policy analyst at the Ministry for the Environment and holds the organics portfolio, which covers waste streams as diverse as food scraps, timber, textiles, and biosolids. Prior to working at the ministry, she worked for the industry body Wastemans for 8 years. She believes in trying to walk the talk, so in her spare time is involved with community food rescue, and she allows strangers to drop off their food scraps in her backyard compost through the Share Waste platform too. So kia ora, Jenny, welcome.
Kia ora. I will just go into screen sharing mode. Kia ora, koutou katoa, ko Jenny toko ingoa, kei tamaki makaro aho I noho ana, kei manatu mo te taeo aho I mahi ana. So I'm dialing in today from the lovely rainy level 4 lockdown in Auckland. And I just want to say a big kind of appreciation for you guys to be able to change so swiftly from an in-person event to a virtual event. I know that's never easy to do. So yeah, kudos for making it happen, because it's always very hard to kind of pivot with COVID. As I said, I'm going to talk to you today about pararopi. It is Māori Language Week. So pararopi means organic waste. So a good word for us all to take away today. So I'm just going to see if it allows me to click on. So I'm sure that everyone on this call would agree that the way we create and manage waste in Aotearoa, New Zealand is just not sustainable. And you'll be pleased to recognise that the government is very clear that we all need to be doing more and thinking differently in this space. So late last week, we were successful in actually publishing our waste data on the Ministry for the Environment's website. And to make this session a little bit more interactive, I've sent through Daughter some of the links that I'm going to talk about it so she can pop them into the chat. So we now have a page on our website where all of our latest waste data is available. So you can see from the graphs here that the tonnage of waste to Class 1 landfills is only going up over time. There was a little blip downwards last year. That was due to COVID, the whole country kind of going on hold for 6 weeks. And then next to it, you can see a chart with our best estimations of what the waste is that's going to our Class 1 landfills. And you can see that organic waste is a key waste stream. So we've got timber at about 12%, we've got food waste at 9%, paper, which is another organic waste stream, at 5%, and then green waste at 6%. So when we're thinking about climate change, when we're thinking about emissions, it's clear to see that organic waste is a key area that we should be working on. And I like the words that Liam used, which is, with organic waste, it's pretty easy to know what the solution is, how to divert it from landfill. We just need to get on and start making it happen. So we estimate that there's about 360,000 tonnes of food waste going to our Class 1 landfills, and probably about 230,000 tonnes of garden waste. So that's a huge amount of waste where we could find a better use or a better outcome for it. I think it's clear that we need to change. We need to produce less to begin with. We need to reuse and recycle more. And we need to also change our cultural mindset as well, so that we really value our materials regardless of what they are. So the ministry's kind of got 3 big pieces of work that it's got underway at the moment. The first is the emissions reduction plan. That's our response to the Climate Change Commission's recommendations in terms of what we need to do to move to a low emissions future. There's a statutory requirement that it's finalised by the end of the year, so a consultation will be coming your way very soon. Equally, in our division in the Ministry for the Environment, we're looking at updating the waste strategy, which once again will be coming out to consultation before the end of the year. And we're also looking at updating the Waste Minimisation Act, and that's to make sure that we've got the right regulatory tools we need for the degree of change that's going to be required. But unfortunately, with government being government, you're probably well aware that until something is out into the public domain, we can't talk about it. So unfortunately today, I can't talk about the high levels kind of strategic ambitions, but I really encourage you that when those consultations are announced, do go along to the webinars, do go along to those information sessions, and do take that time to make a submission, because we do listen to what the public and what the industry has to say. What I can do is talk about our waste reduction work program. And once again, I'll get Daughter to pop a link to that in the chat as well, if any of you haven't seen it. And this is where we've published what we're actually working on at the moment with some details and timelines. So it's a really useful document if you want to understand our full work program of what we're doing. So in essence, our work program has got 5 pillars to it. So the first one is about building foundations for a transformed waste system. And here we're really talking about updating the waste strategy, working out what we want to do, what we want to achieve, and then updating the Waste Minimisation Act, making sure we've got the tools to enable us to do it. The second is to expand investment in the sector. So we've managed to get the levy to be increased and expanded. That's going to give us additional revenue, but where do we need to invest? So really understanding what the opportunities are and where that investment should be targeted. We've started to think about systems level change. So not looking at projects in isolation, but looking at systems. So that's things like a container return scheme, which is a system for dealing with beverage containers, standardizing curbside recycling, which is how we deal with all our household recycling. Where appropriate, we're also addressing individual material streams and products. So for example, we've banned single-use shopping bags, we've banned produce bags, we're looking to phase out those hard to recycle plastics number 3 and number 6. So really looking at kind of where a targeted intervention makes sense. And finally, we're looking at strengthening operational and compliance activity. So that's things like gathering better waste data, making sure that the waste is going to the right type of landfill to places where it's consented to be. So what I thought I would do today is talk you through some of the practical stuff that the ministry is doing around organics. People often think it's all policy, but actually we like to do some practical on the ground stuff that we think will really help as well. So I'm sure you're all very familiar with the reduce reuse hierarchy, but when we think about the food waste hierarchy, it's just got a few little extra bits in there. So obviously prevention is always important, but the next level down is called optimization. And that's about, firstly, if we can't reduce our food waste, can we redistribute it to people who need it? Or can we turn it into another type of food material? That's called food upcycling. Then if we can't do that, we might consider sending it to animal feed. And only then would we go lower down the pyramid and look at anaerobic digestion or composting. And so I suppose I would always encourage people to kind of think about, well, what can we do first to reduce it, to redistribute it? And only then should we be looking to kind of go, right, now what are we going to do with it in terms of diverting it from landfill? So I'm going to use this framework, I suppose, to talk through what the ministry is currently doing. So firstly, when we think about prevention and reduction, in 2019, the Environment Select Committee, which is a cross-party committee made up of National and Labour and the Greens and other smaller political parties, they organised an inquiry into food waste reduction. So they were really keen to understand across government what we could do to reduce the amount of food that was wasted. From that, there was a report, and the government has agreed to implement 3 initial recommendations. So the first one is setting a target. So this is a target for making less food waste in the first place. It's a reduction target. They've agreed to establish a definition. So what is food waste? And that's so that we can establish a national baseline. So currently in New Zealand, we've got a really good understanding of how much food households waste and what they waste through the Love Food Hate Waste research. We know what the supermarkets waste. We know a little bit about what the hospitality sector wastes, our cafes and restaurants. We've really got no idea how much food is wasted by the grocery sector or even on farm or in orchards or with vegetable growers. So what we really want to do is establish that national baseline so that then we can kind of work out, well, where should the target sit? You know, what are we trying to achieve? For the past 2 years, our waste minimisation funding round has signalled that food waste reduction and food waste redistribution is a key funding signal. What that means is that those projects get prioritised over any other worthwhile applications that come through. And I don't know how many of you are aware of Kai Eka, which is a fabulous project that's run through a marae in South Auckland. And they started off basically going down to the wharves, and when someone was going out fishing on their boat and they didn't want their fish heads and their fish frames, saying, hey, look, could we take those away? Because actually for our community, this is a real delicacy. They received waste minimisation funding, and they've now scaled up so that they can actually work with commercial fishing fleets that come into Auckland. And as you can see, they're rescuing a huge amount of food, which for some people would be considered a source of waste, but for other people is, you know, fish head soup is a thing. The second thing I would like to talk about now is thinking about optimization and reuse. And often when we think about waste, we think that the Ministry for the Environment is the only ministry that's working on this. But in actual fact, food waste spans across both MFE, MPI, and Ministry for Social Development. And partly in response to COVID last year, the Ministry for Social Development has really done a lot of investment funding in this space. And 3 new organisations have been set up: New Zealand Food Network, the Aotearoa Food Rescue Alliance, and the called a Hiakai Zero Hunger Collective. And all of these are really designed to increase the capacity and capability of our food rescue sectors. In particular, New Zealand Food Network is a fabulous organisation, and what they do is they deal with food in bulk. So sometimes we have people who get a cancelled export order, and when you get a cancelled export order, you might be able to donate 10 to 12 pallets worth of food, but an individual food bank or food rescue group just can't cope with the scale. So New Zealand Food Network has been funded to basically distribute food at scale. And I saw recently something had come through from Fair Food in Auckland, and they had received a donation of 7 pallets of hummus. Now, no one food bank or food rescue group could ever cope with 7 pallets of hummus, but thanks to the New Zealand Food Network, that's now gone out to thousands of food banks around the country who can all deal with, 3 or 4 cases of hummus each. Equally, the Waste Minimisation Fund has funded individual food rescue groups for their chiller vans and storage facilities. And I wanted to do a bit of a shout out or a recognition to Nelson Environment Centre. Back in 2017, they saw the need to set up a food rescue initiative in their region because no one else was doing it. And their latest stats are 419 tonnes of food rescued since they've begun. And they feed every week or distribute every week enough food for 7,000 meals. So that's a really great example of where the zero waste community has stepped in, identified a need. We're seeing great environmental benefits, but we're seeing huge community benefits from such an initiative. So, really want to recognise, I can see that Karen Driver is on the call today. She was one of the people who was involved early on. So that's an example of a wonderful mahi in that area. So finally, if we can't reduce it and we can't send it off to people or to feed animals, we are looking at composting or anaerobic digestion as a solution for pulling it out of landfill. So the Ministry for the Environment is currently doing an infrastructure stock take. So the stock take has gone through for composting and anaerobic digestion, but also for construction and demolition, for plastics, for recycling, and looked at what is our existing infrastructure and what kind of new infrastructure do we need if we really want to make a significant dent in the amount of waste going to landfill. But I think the infrastructure stock take is slightly misleading in terms of its name. It should probably be called the infrastructure and intervention stock take, because we're not just looking at plant and physical equipment, we are looking at interventions and system changes as well. So for example, if we plan to divert a whole lot of compost from landfill, someone needs to use that compost. So have we got a good market demand for that compost? What do we need to do to make sure that people are prepared and willing to buy that compost? What do we need to do to make sure that that compost is of a high standard, that it's actually going to enhance the soil rather than jeopardize the quality of our soil? And I think it's also worthwhile pointing out that the ministry is what I call technology agnostic. So we don't have a preferred position on whether decentralized community composting or anaerobic digestion or commercial composting is the way forward. We recognise that New Zealand is very diverse, our communities are very diverse, and different solutions will be needed. And we're also technology agnostic when it comes to transportation. So if you can get a bike with a trailer as a useful way to divert food waste from landfill, excellent. Although our preference would always be for low emissions or zero emissions vehicles. So think electric if possible when you're thinking about any vehicles you might want to use. So a second project is actually the one that I'm leading. It's called Standardising Curbside Recycling. And initially, this was a project that was really looking at what we call dry recycling and making sure that people could recycle the same things wherever they were in New Zealand, so that when you went on holiday, you didn't end up contaminating someone else's recycling bin by recycling as you did in your own city when the rules were different somewhere else. But as part of that project, a recommendation came through that we should also be looking at how can we incentivise the rollout of curbside food scraps collection? How can we basically divert more food scraps from landfill? And last but not least, once again, we have been funding a variety of projects through our Waste Minimisation Fund. And you can see that we fund home composting programs, we've funded hot composting unit for Ruapehu, and we've recently helped to fund bins for Tauranga and Western Bay of Plenty to roll out their collections. So once again, in the chat, we do publish online what kinds of projects and which projects we have funded for the Waste Minimisation Fund. So if you're ever interested to see, hey, who gets funded and what do they get funded for? Once again, Daughter can pop that link in the chat. It's a little bit, does need to be updated. And there is always a bit of a time lag between when we fund things and when they're publicly announced. But yeah, if you're interested in that, good to have a look at. So I arrived at the Ministry of the Environment back in December, and we had this report which talked about incentivising the rollout of curbside food scraps collections. But the first question I had in my head was, well, what about home composting? Do we really need a service offering? Could we solve our household food scraps problem purely by encouraging home composting? So I looked at the research. We hadn't really done any research since 2008, and that was 2 questions in a bigger survey. So we went out and we commissioned some research. We're still fully analysing the results, but I have permission to share a kind of a sneak preview with you today. But the report will then go out into the public domain for everyone to use. And so basically what we did, we worked with a market research company, a survey of 1,000 people nationally representative, and we found that 55% of households home compost. And that's actually a decrease of 8% since 2008. And that's despite councils like Auckland Council having the fabulous Compost Collective program, Tauranga City Council promotes worm farming workshops. But it's probably no surprise, because when we think about our housing crisis, when we think about our intensification of cities, we found that 25% of households have no outdoor garden. So they're living in houses that have, balconies or maybe a patio with some pot plants. And I think particularly if, like me, you live in Auckland, you can see that trend just continuing. One house gets sold, that house gets taken away, 4 new townhouses get put in, and there's literally very little outdoor living space. The other thing is we did a deep dive into what people were home composting, and we found that people probably weren't aware of the full potential of what you could use your home compost for. And you can see that people had high comfort levels with composting fruit and vegetable scraps, but when you looked at other types of products like food and leftovers and meat and dairy, they were far less confident or far less willing to compost those types of products. The chart on the right-hand side comes from our Love Food, Hate Waste research that we did a couple of years ago. And you can see that in the top 10 foods thrown away into the rubbish bins, we've got bread, we've got chicken, we've got leftovers, the types of things that people have less confidence in home composting or are less willing to home compost. So it's not that they don't waste these type of foods, it's for whatever reason, people don't feel confident about putting those into their home composts. Now, if any of you have ever done market research, people often have a positive view of themselves. They often say, yes, I'm doing a great job, I'm doing it amazingly, I'm doing a lot of composting. So when we did our Love Food, Hate Waste research, what we did is we compared what people said with what they actually did. And you can see here that people who solely use their curbside collection as a way of dealing with their food scraps was about 2.8 kilos per week. And when people composted, it definitely did make a difference, but they were still putting food out in their curbside collection. So what that means to me is firstly is that home composting is only going to be partially effective at dealing with our household food scraps. I definitely think we should still be encouraging people to do it, because taking responsibility for your own waste and understanding how much you waste really encourages you to look at reducing your waste. And so if any of you are involved in home composting programs, I think the thing to really think about is anyone who is willing to home compost, how do we get them to compost as much as possible? So it might be a case of really promoting something like bokashi, which deals really well with your cooked food, with your meat and with your dairy products. So you were saying, hey, have a compost bin, but you might want to have bokashi as well. If people's concern is about rats, and they should well be concerned, we've now got a rat trap and we caught 8 in the first 3 months, but let me tell you that now we catch only 1 every 9 months. But you might want to partner up with the local conservation group and give everyone a free rat trap and say, hey, if you want to move into home composting, you can compost these materials provided you've got a rat trap. So I think it's just really important. And as I said, we've done a bit more research, we've got a bit more information, and we will make that publicly available so that we can really maximize the effectiveness of any home composting programs that are run. So obviously home composting is not going to be the one solution. So we are going to have to look at ways that we can enable those food scraps to be diverted. So this next slide is probably more of a personal reflection from me rather than a ministry position. So when we're thinking about, well, what kind of solutions are available to us? How are we going to take all these food scraps? How are we going to help those households who don't have a garden to deal with their food scraps? I think there's a couple of questions that it's probably useful to think about. So I think the first thing to think about is your solution going to be scalable within your community? And I use the word community deliberately because not every solution is scalable to the whole town or to the whole Auckland. But if you can be scalable so that your whole community can participate, that's really important. So as a practical example, if you've got a project where, for example, you're like, hey, we can set up a food scraps collections to divert food waste from cafes and restaurants, and there's 20 cafes and restaurants in your suburb, you probably want to make sure that you've got a system that could scale up to all of those 20 cafes and restaurants so that you can kind of be a service offering for everyone. Whereas if you only have the capacity to deal with 4 or 5 of them, you may find that someone else then comes along and then you're suddenly in competition with someone because they've got a service and they can provide it for the 15 restaurants, and then they might want to kind of, take your business as well. So I think thinking about scalability is really critical. The second thing to think about is sustainable financially, and particularly financially in the long term. So when you divert food scraps from landfill, you can make your money in 2 ways. You can either charge people to take the material, or you can sell the end product. So you've always got to think about, right, well, where's my income going to come from? How much can I charge people? Is this a service to help them divert their food scraps from landfill and do a good thing? Or what quality product or what story can I tell to go along with my product, which will incentivize people to pay a little bit more, or will incentivize people, what's the quality of what I'm selling? I think it's also really important to think about, is your solution going to be inclusive and equitable? So we know that we've got an aging population. So if you've got a solution that maybe relies on someone carrying their food scraps down to, for example, a community garden, if you've got elderly people, how are they going to be able to do that? If you've got a solution that's too far away geographically and people don't have cars, what kind of solution are you going to come up for that? So I think it's really important that we come up with solutions that can work for everyone. And we think about those issues of people where there's physical frailty, where they don't have access to transportation. How can we enable them to participate? And finally, I think it's really important to make sure that you've got your community on board. Your community can be your strongest champions, in terms of, contacting councillors, contacting the media, and really kind of lobbying for your cause. But equally, the community can be like, well, we don't want to have to pay this much money for this solution or for this service. So getting your community on board is really important. And one thing I'm mindful of is that in the minds of the public, there's a really strong connection between climate change and electric vehicles, climate change and not flying, climate change and not walking, but the connection between climate change and actually wasting less food or diverting your food scraps is not such a strong connection. But I think that's really important, because I know that I'm not in a position to buy a $30,000 electric vehicle, much as though I might like to. And so for many people out there, actually, if they want to do something impactful personally about climate change, reducing their food waste or diverting those food scraps is a really empowering thing that they can all do. And so these questions that I've posed are questions that I would also pose to the business community as well, because they have to answer these same questions. I think the business community will struggle or finds it harder to make their systems inclusive and equitable and to get their communities on board. And possibly for the zero waste community, it's harder to answer the questions of, is it scalable, is it sustainable financially? But regardless of whether you're a business or whether you're a community group, those questions are fundamental or are key to both groups. So I thought it would be really good to end on a positive note. And I was thinking about one example that I really like, because I think it fulfills all those 4 criteria. And if you could imagine that back in 1991, a group of people sat down and someone was like, hey, I really want to create jobs for people who are struggling, for people who are struggling with depression, who are potentially suicidal, because I think that meaningful employment would be really great. And my wonderful idea is we're going to sell animal feces to the public. I'm sure you would have all thought, that is just crazy. Why would you want to sell animal feces to the public as a way to create jobs? You're on hiding to nothing. This must be the world's most unpopular waste stream to ever deal with. Give it some clever branding, associate it with giraffes, and you've got Zudu. So Zudu has been going since 1991. They now employ 60 people. They've expanded from Auckland to Wellington. They make a profit. All their profits go to suicide prevention. And one of the things that I personally like is that they have free delivery. So they've got this product that anyone in the community can ring up, can order, and you get it delivered to you. So that's a really good example of a community group that's ticked all of the boxes. Their motivation to do that wasn't because they wanted to reduce waste. They were literally thinking, we want to create employment, where's an opportunity? And they saw an opportunity in animal feces. So I'm sure that for all of you on the call today, trying to sell food scraps or compost made from food scraps may be a far easier ask than having to sell compost made from animal feces. But it does show the importance of telling a really good story. And if you have a really good story, people will buy into it. People will support you in what you're trying to do. So Daughter, I don't know how we've gone for time, but I'm happy to take any partai that people might have. And otherwise, I'm looking forward to hearing some of the exciting examples that you have of people who are already making this happen.
Thanks, Jenny. Liam, do you want to make a call on that?
I think we're probably running a little bit behind, so we'll power through. But thanks so much, Jenny, for the presentation. Really comprehensive, and yeah, I think so important to remember that hierarchy. You know, the food waste hierarchy, where we're actually trying to prevent and reduce food waste and organic waste from happening in the first place before we think about what we deal with it. I think a lot of the initiatives that we work on with the Zero Waste Network are kind of in that recycling part of the hierarchy, at least in organic waste, and we're going to hear from that. But I just wanted to say, I think that's really important, that prevention conversation is such a key part of it. But I think there's also really interesting ways we can link up those reduction top of the food waste hierarchy stuff, and actually I think some of our members who we're going to hear from now are actually thinking about, you know, linking those things up as well. So anyway, thanks again, Jenny. And also, as Jenny mentioned, there's going to be some public consultations coming out around the various things that the government is working on in the waste space. So encourage you all to have your say on those when they come out. I know certainly many of us will be submitting on those. Cool. So we'll move on to hearing from our 3 awesome members who are doing organic waste and composting enterprises. So first off, we have Liz Stanway from Extreme Zero Waste. And
it's me. Hold on while I try and share Liz's thing. Okay.
Nice. I'm sure. Oh, sorry, Dorothy, you go.
No. Is that? Are you guys seeing that?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yes,
so
good.
if I go there.
It hasn't come up for me in the presentation mode. It's still in the.
Okay, I'll figure that out. You do some introductions.
Yeah. Cool. I was just going to say, I don't know if Extreme Zero Waste needs too much introduction with our members, but you know, Extreme Zero Waste have really been at the forefront of resource recovery and zero waste enterprise in Aotearoa for 20 odd years, I think, and you know, have achieved massive diversion of materials from landfill, reached loads of people through the education programs, and many other amazing things. And so we're going to hear from Liz about their organic waste side of what they do, which has been running for a few years now. So yeah, that looks a bit better, daughter. Thank you. So yeah, kia ora, Liz. Hand it over to you.
Kia ora koutou katoa. I think, is there another, well, there's a first screen, daughter. There was just like a photo, that one, thank you. Ko kare oi te maunga, ko whaingaroa te moana. He treaty, tangata treaty ahau, ko Liz Stanway tōku ingoa. He mihi nui ki a koutou katoa. And thank you very much for inviting us to share our journey with organic resources in Whaingaroa area. So first slide just gives you a little overview of our beautiful town and maunga and whenua around the area, just to give you some context. And the next slide, I'm going to start with our community because that's where it all begins. Extreme Zero Waste works a lot with the community and has done for 20 years. So for me, having been with Extreme Waste since the beginning, it seems it's quite hard sometimes to separate where Extreme Waste, where the boundary lies between community and our projects and our program. The features of the community are paramount to all the systems that we design to deal with our waste together collectively as much as possible. And so we have at this point, but probably for a long time, we have an environmentally aware population with a a history of resilience and do-it-yourself. We're on the West Coast, we're a long way from other centres of population, and there is a good sense of just get in there and do it yourself when it comes to solving problems and issues. We have a history of activism and community-led environmental restoration projects, which I won't go into, but you may have heard of others like Harbour Care, Whaingaroa Harbour Care, Karioi Maunga Project. Our town is growing rapidly. It's been growing steadily, perhaps in the last 10 years, but it's picking up a pace now with the demand for coastal lifestyles and properties. We have a high number of absentee landlords and holiday rentals. Sometimes 30% of our housing stock is rented out to Airbnbs, etc. And we have a subdivision of 500 houses going in over the next 15 years. So our village is about to grow by 33% at least. So, and there'll be others around in the peripheral of the town as well. So it's a rapidly growing township. And we're very blessed with a very connected community. We have quite well established food security networks. And it was amazing during the first COVID lockdown that we got to experience how functional our food security was in Whaingaroa. A lot of sharing of kai and not wasting of kai at all levels, from our food suppliers and our home growers and our food producers. It was very, very heartening to see our community functioning at that level. We have some emerging food producers in our community. It's not traditionally a growing, not for a long time, not since Māori were probably growing a lot of their kai to sustain themselves. But you know, in the many decades since, we've got used to bringing in food into our community, and there's some change in that. There's emerging food producers, and we do enjoy a reasonably high level of home composting in our community. There's been several decades of composting education actively delivered through several community organisations, so we've got a good network of home composting. We are so our composting system is designed with our small town in mind. And our town has a resident population of around 5,000 now, and we have designed a system of curbside food waste collection with bins and caddies and coarse starch liners. The food waste collection is integrated into other curbside collections, so that's one of the amazing benefits of adding the food waste collection into an existing community recycling operation, and our food waste is not transported further than 10 kilometres to the composting system. And our food waste service is very complementary to other ways of waste minimisation and home diversion, and it is seen as complementary and part of the solution to where we find ourselves today in, you know, high levels of food waste. So we just see it as part of the solution, and we keep working on waste minimisation, home diversion, and working with our community to look at other ways of diverting. The system that we use is what's called a horizontal composting unit. It's a 30-metre long concrete trough-like thing. Construction above ground, Our one has 114 cubic metre capacity, and the food waste is loaded up in weekly batches into this one end of the composter, and through the natural processes it's composted up to 65 degrees C and moves sequentially along the HCU, and it can be held in the composter for 10 to 13 weeks. And then it's taken out and matured a little bit longer on the pad before it's ready for prepared for sale. We also continue to take Whaingaroa's garden waste, and we use that. Some of that goes into the hot composter, and some of it, the rest of it is composted using a cooler compost system, and it takes about 6 months to be ready. And one of the great things is that we've found that we can take noxious plants through using both the systems. We've had an aha moment and realised that actually it's been a real breakthrough, and we can take the likes of ginger and things with seeds we can put through the hot composter and destroy them and turn them into really amazing soil products. All of our operations are on council land that we lease, and we operate under a resource consent through the regional council. Quick slide of, there's a couple of slides about why this model works well in our community. This graphic is like an overview of the benefits and the performance of our system to date. This is a sort of a summary of three years of operation. So we're coming up 4 years actually. So we've been operating since 2017. So just past our 4th year of operation. We've managed to divert 1,614 tonnes of unavoidable food waste. And so we communicate very clearly with our community that we don't encourage food waste. We only want your unavoidable food waste. So we only want really spoiled food. We want to see food that can be reused and consumed.
Liz, 1 minute.
1 minute, okay, so you can just have a quick look at that. The reason that we think it works well is it's easy for people to use. That came through clearly. The equipment is accessible. The services we've tried to provide it is equitable, so it's available to everyone, and we're aiming to provide it through our rating system at minimal cost. So for less than a cup of coffee a week, you can receive a food waste collection service. Yes, it's integrated with all of our other systems, including the management, the administration, staff sharing and equipment sharing, which works really well at efficiency and sustainability. Residents have kind of adapted the service to suit their own needs. Some of them are putting out weekly and fortnightly. They might be composting at home and using the food waste service, or sometimes using the food waste service. It's very easy if everyone gets the service, people can jump on and off as they need, and that really helps with maximising diversion. It seems to work. We've managed to kind of get participation with our non-permanent residents and holiday homes, so we've kind of been working away on that. And we have a drop-off system for people that miss the collections, so that also helps. The system is well supported because people actually want compost, and there is interest in food security and sovereignty. And our participation, it's difficult to measure, but it sits around 50% of the permanently occupied houses in any 1 week. And again, yeah, and participation is difficult to measure. Our challenges are working with our district council and just moving along at the same pace and with the same knowledge and understanding. Sometimes it's a mismatch and end up falling foul of political whims. So that's always a little challenge there, but we're working through some of the issues that we've had. We have issues with food-related plastic contamination of food waste, so the likes of the fruit stickers, the banana strips, glad wrap and a few things like that, but some things are really difficult for our people to get out, and others we find that communications really helps. When we do comms around the contamination, it really improves, so we just keep pumping that information out. Yes, we have a challenge coming up now of co-design, well, kind of revisiting our systems design with a growing population, a growing number of houses. So that's going to be, for me, it's exciting. There's opportunity to diversify and try new things. And we're also really excited about the emerging food growers in the community and building direct relationships with them and supplying compost to support that growing of local kai. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Liz. Thanks so much. Can you all hear me? I've just taken my my little mic out because I was having some issues. But you're
Yes,
good? Yeah.
I can hear you. Hey, I might just say, I don't think we got through all those slides, but I'll put PDFs of all of the presentations, if our presenters are okay with that, onto the Trello board, and I'll do that now.
Awesome. Awesome. And a couple of questions come through for Liz. We'll hold questions for now. Feel free, Liz, to answer the questions in the chat by text. But yeah, keep questions coming through. Hopefully we are kind of trying to rapid fire through these. We're always pressed for time, but we'll quickly shift on to our next presenter, which is I'd like to invite Betsy and David Kettle from Hibiscus Coast Zero Waste. Hibiscus Coast Zero Waste are a group doing all sorts of zero waste initiatives up in their part of Auckland. They run the Whangaparaoa Community Recycling Centre. They do all sorts of zero waste education and more. But we're going to hear about their really interesting and unique model for organic waste management, which is their City to Farm project. So I will pass on to
Betsy and David, do you need me to share your presentation?
No, we should be fine.
I've just pushed the
share screen. Can you see it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So kia ora, everyone. We're with the Hibiscus Coast Zero Waste Group, and our project called City to Farm is a partnership between a local farmers and our community recycling group. And we have a lot of support from Auckland Council and Hibiscus Bay's local board. The council has been instrumental through WMF grants for funding our initial research and ongoing projects. So in terms of a scale of different composting projects, with source reduction at the top being the highest and most efficient way to handle food waste, and landfilling and incineration at the bottom, the City to Farm system is halfway because it constitutes a medium scale, locally based compost solution. But what's a bit different about City to Farm is rather than making compost and selling it, our business model is we use the organic material to build soil on farms. So it's a regenerative agriculture project, probably more than a composting project. And what we're trying to do, the business model is to enable farmers to improve their soil to the point where they can grow something other than cattle and pine trees. Because if you look at our community, we've got a lot of very steep, hilly, clayey soils that you can't really do anything else with except dry stock farming and pine trees. So And we're hoping that if we can show that we're creating something called terra preta, which is a very high carbon type of soil, that farmers may even be able to get carbon credits. And it would be, if we can get farmers carbon credits for improving their soil and growing topsoil, then this would incentivize climate change to be driven by farmers rather than fighting it. And it would also really kickstart the whole organics diversion. Next, I guess I can do this. So our system involves compost swales. And I have to give Richard Lee credit for this. Compost swales are dug parallel to the contours, and they will trap rainwater and any runoff from the swales. And in the bottom of the swales, we're digging in something called biochar. And biochar is basically charcoal, very fine charcoal made out of New Zealand sawdust, pine, forestry pine, untreated. And it has a whole number of properties, which is really good for composting. Holding on to water, holding on to nutrients, it acts as a permanent form of compost, it provides a habitat for microorganisms, it balances the pH of the bokashi food scraps. And then, in order to spread the food scraps, we collect I'll talk more about how we collect it, but the farmer has a fast feeder on the back of his tractor. And so all the wheelie bins and buckets are emptied into that green fast feeder at the back. And that is spread into the swales on top of a layer of woody mulch. And then after the food scraps have been raked out, another layer of woody mulch goes on top. And there's a 4-stage composting process. So the food producers, which are primarily cafes, restaurants, schools, retirement villages, and ECEs, are taught how to layer up the food scraps with bokashi, with zing, which we feel is the best way to do it because it takes such a wide variety of food scraps. And then the food scraps are left in the containers out at the farm. And you can see we don't use any plastic liners. We hand wash the bins and buckets. But the food scraps cure out at the farm in a special curing area for a couple of weeks. Some of the fish scraps we let sit for about a month. And then when they are cured enough, then they go into the fast feeder. But the first stage is bokashi fermentation, and the next stage is hot composting, but it's not thermophilic. It only gets to about 40 to 50 degrees, but it breaks down very quickly, probably because it's already pre-broken down with the bokashi. At the right time of the year, the black soldier fly move in and really munch through the high protein items like fish and meat. And when it cools down further, the worms move in. So basically, these become giant worm bins on the ground. Next. So what were we thinking when we chose this system? Well, we started off working with Richard Lee, and we thought he had a really good idea, which was bananas love a high, they're really gross feeders, and they are New Zealand's biggest import of fruit. And he was growing them in his backyard in a compost pit, and he putting food scraps on the ground layered up with woody mulch and growing these fantastic bananas. And our community here on the North Shore, particularly, Hibiscus Coast is about 40 minutes north of Auckland. And so we're quite separate from the rest of Auckland. And people, there's a lot of retired farmers who understand the value of food scraps. And nobody liked the idea of sending our resources all the way down to Tuakau or Envirofert to be hot composted. We felt that they should be used locally. And we also have all these farms out to the west of us in the Rodney district who can't do anything with their soil, so why not improve their soil? And that's basically the model we came up with. But it's also dependent upon the farmers being able to create an economically viable cropping system so that this would drive itself. And this part we're still working on. We've been running now for about 3 years, and we're just now starting to grow bananas, get bananas. And basically, the way it works is the collection is run by Hibiscus Coast Zero Waste. That's the red side. And we collect throughout the peninsula and also in Browns Bay to the south of us. And then the food scraps go out to the farm, which is kind of in the middle of the North Island. And we basically have broken it down with different jobs for the different, for us and for the farmer. Next. So in terms of limitations, right now, the Auckland Unitary Plan says that even rural properties cannot compost more than 50 cubic meters on their property at one time. So what we are doing is we are constantly monitoring the food scrap breakdown to make sure that it's completely broken down before we add any more. And David keeps meticulous records of how much green waste, how much food scraps are going on, and he and the farmer are constantly monitoring the breakdown. So no more food scraps are added to a swale until they're completely decomposed, or at least, you know, completely identifiable and the worms have moved in. And I think there's a minimum length of time, at least 6 weeks, but more like 9 weeks. We do need a lot of water for bin washing, and we've got that at the farm we're at because the farmer has a pond. And we think our biggest limitation may be finding more motivated farmers like Phil and Jenny Granger, who we're working with, who would take this project on, because it's quite a bit of work. And they've invested a lot of money in their tractor and digger and the composting curing area. But the other thing that we really need is a lot of research done on the rate of carbon sequestration. And David's been doing a lot of work on carbon monitoring. So he and Phil have been doing lots of compost and soil samples and having those analyzed. So we want to see how quickly we can establish new soil carbon. And on the collection side, it would be great to have some videos of what we're doing so we can explain it to people. Our biggest probably limitation on the collection side is convincing commercial operations to pay more to have their food scraps collected. And so we have a program whereby we promote them. We have little table toppers that they can put on their cafe table. We put them up on our website. We try to get articles written about what they're doing. And we're also trying to explain to the community, commercial businesses, that as the waste levy goes up, it will be more expensive to pay for waste. So if they can divert the heavy stuff like food scraps, they may be saving themselves money.
2 minutes, guys.
How am I doing on time?
2 minutes to go.
Okay, so we are working on trying to, we have 3 big goals. We're trying to create a more resilient food system. Right now, we can't really grow large amounts of food up here in North Auckland because we don't have the wonderful prime agricultural soils that they have like in the south, in the Pukekohe area. So if we could grow food locally on our steep, hilly, clay soil, we would be creating a more resilient local food system. if we can show that we're building topsoil, and I don't know how familiar the group is to this, but they're finding that building soil carbon through topsoil building rivals forestry carbon. So you should be able to store as much, if not more, carbon in the soil as you can grow in a forest. But, and for a very long period of time. And if a forest burns down, you don't have the carbon anymore. Whereas if a forest burns down, you still have the carbon in the soil. So, and you have all the other benefits of having healthy soil, better water infiltration, better buffering against the extremes of climate change. And of course, if we can create new and better jobs in the rural sector, that will help us locally too. So we have some.
Just this one question about the soils.
Does regenerative cropping? Yes, it is a permaculture system. So Richard Lee and ourselves and the Grangers are all permaculturalists. We're all keen in permaculture. And in fact, the whole swale model comes from the permaculture. It is a permaculture concept, basically. So it's all based on permaculture. Okay, so this will be for later. But we do have a lot of programs already. We have something called the Zero Waste, Zero Carbon program in schools, where we go into schools and we get kids excited about soil carbon and how if they participate in the city, if the school participates in the city to farm system, they're helping create a local food system and mitigate climate change. We have a website. We're going out door knocking on local businesses. We've got a bunch of kindies involved in the City to Farm project, and we're about to make a video showing that the kindies can use about where their food scraps go, the idea of a cyclical food scrap system. And we give presentations. That's enough. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah, and we hope to scale up. Okay, thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Betsy and David. So interesting, and such a unique concept to the way we, I'm sure a lot of the waste sector think about organic waste management. I feel like those opportunities for food growing and for sequestering carbon in the soil are just massive conversations that we should be exploring in this space. So thanks so much for sharing that model, and also those limitations as well. Obviously, some of those make a really good case for some more advocacy that we need in this space to get around some of those planning and consenting issues and whatnot. So keen to raise those issues too. Cool. Finally, our third speaker is Kate Walmsley from KaiCycle. KaiCycle are a community scale composting and urban farming initiative right here in the heart of Te Whanganui-a-Tara, Wellington. And I think they're really seen as leaders in this space. There have been a number of projects that have modeled themselves off KaiCycle's model. So I've also had the pleasure of working with Kate with our Waste-Free Welly group and other things too. So kia ora, Kate, look forward to hearing from you.
Kia ora, Liam. Kia ora koutou. Wonderful to be here. This is my first Sustainable Communities Hui, so I'm very grateful to be here. And thanks to Daughter Liam and the Zero Waste Network team for having me here and the opportunity to be part of today's session alongside Liz and Betsy and David. Cheers. I'm tangata Tiriti. My ancestors are from Great Britain and the United States. I live here in Te Whanganui-a-Tara, and my mahi is with KaiCycle, as Liam has introduced. Thank you, Liam. I'll try and speed through if I can. Don't really need to go through this. This is obviously the business as usual we are part of trying to make a shift away from. And this is part of the solution. So KaiCycle does urban composting and farming within the city. We aim to divert a small proportion of local organics in order to catalyse urban food production, build food resilience, and community and ecological well-being. So in this presentation, I'm just going to focus on our composting model. So as you might be able to tell from the diagram, we do this through local drop-off points and low carbon transport collections. We take this collected material to different composting locations that we manage. The compost we make is used on our urban farm and provided to other local food growing projects. So the idea is trying to close the loop in a small way. Even if we can grow a small amount of our food within the city, that has great implications for food resilience and so many other co-benefits. Obviously, we are operating at a very small scale, much smaller than extreme zero waste and city to farm. Not saying this is the one and only solution to urban organics, but it does have a lot of value to add to a wider toolkit of solutions, we think. Here's just a few photos of our mahi to show the system. Key features of our model. We pay our staff, so we try and always trying to do better at pinning to a proper living wage. Obviously, paid staff are important for the reliability and consistency when it comes to managing large amounts of organic waste and ensuring a good composting process. That is pretty important. We offer these composting services for small-scale waste producers, mainly offices and households, and a few small cafes. Even with the small amounts of up to 60 litres per week. Obviously, with a lot of these producers, it's a large amount of our landfill organics. We collect and process as locally as possible using low carbon transport, or encouraging people to walk or bike to drop off to us. Keeping it local helps foster greater connection and engagement. People can see our cyclists coming into the office or visit our urban farm, know what their organic waste is, or these resources, these nutrients are going toward, and what they're contributing to. We think this higher engagement also is useful for promoting waste avoidance in the first place. We'd love to do more work on the waste avoidance, but being a small team, we have limited capacity. So that's something we'd love to do more of in terms of moving up the waste hierarchy. So we're looking at a decentralized network. So instead of having one larger composting facility, having multiple smaller ones, we're having compost managers moving around them. And again, that helps keep it local and minimize transport. We have a not-for-profit model. We're transparent as possible and open source. The idea is that we're, anyone who wants to know what we do will, as far as our capacity allows, we will try and share exactly what we do so that together, collectively, we can innovate and improve as fast as we can. The more groups that we have developing, innovating, and sharing models and systems, the faster we can improve and grow our collective impact, get more food waste out of landfill, and building more community resilience. We're part of the Urban Farmers Alliance, which is a really great nationwide support network for doing just this. So we still think we're kind of in the early adopter version of our business model. And this is how it works. It's user pays, it's a monthly fee, and we just have one rate for households or not-profits and another rate for businesses. So just keeping it really simple, because none of us are particularly business model oriented. The pricing is based on our break-even point from the early days, from about 2016, 2017, when we were, first couple of years of operation. Yes, this was the break-even point. Over time, we did manage to accumulate enough cash to start reinvesting in our growth. The drop-off system has only been going since earlier this year, but we're pretty excited about this. This was a trial that was funded by our City Council, Wellington City Council, in collaboration with Sustainability Trust. We see this as being a more scalable, accessible option as we can do at low cost, and does promote higher engagement and kind of brings us out of that curbside collection kind of entrenched mindset. This model covers operating costs only. It does rely on setup costs being met another way. To start with, we just bootstrapped it and built compost bins out of pellets. Having external seed funding really does help speed up this expansion so we can achieve more faster. I'm not I want to just kind of mention that we don't say this is the best version of the model. There is still heaps of room for improvement and innovation. And ultimately for scaling this, we will need to bring the price down. And there are many ways that that could be done, for example, selling compost products. But we just haven't needed to really change this model yet because we still can't meet demand. So that is a good problem to have. Key features of our community. In the next slide, I actually go through more features of Te Whanganui-a-Kara. I decided to focus here on the key features of our composting community, so who are our supporters of our and users of our services. Yeah, households and offices, kind of a range of different sectors and sizes and ages and stages in terms of our household customers. Located throughout the CBD and more central suburbs, so Wellington's fairly compact, making it easy to do bike-based collections. And their kind of reasons for composting with us and kind of opting to pay for that is diverting food waste from landfill, having a positive environmental impact, and seeing it as part of their responsibility. So I just wanted to put that quote in from a customer, which I thought was really nice. This is a map. It's not very clear, but in pink, you can see that's kind of our current service area. So like central southern suburbs. The orange is our waitlist entries. As you can see, there is high demand from a broader area than what we currently do service. And why do we think this model works well in Wellington and why there is high interest? We do think Wellington is a great context for testing alternative models for urban organics. We don't currently have a municipal organics collection, and that's for many reasons, including the challenges of Wellington's hills and street layout and houses up 1,000 steps and kind of issues with the wider waste situation. But we do see this as a really amazing opportunity for exploring alternative systems. Kaicycle probably wouldn't have started and certainly wouldn't have got to this point if there was already council curbside organics collection. I think we've also just been around long enough and people see our bikes around twice a week and kind of know there's a fairly good awareness of who we are and what we're doing. So that's helped garner kind of wider interest and support. I really want to mention that so many people have been involved in this project over the last kind of 7 years from concept to kind of where we are now. And it's only been possible thanks to our wider support network. We get support from Switched On Bikes, who rent us e-bikes cheaply, Sustainability Trust, City Council, so many volunteers, the list goes on. So we're not operating in a silo, we are interdependent with our local community. This model has been picked up by a group in Paikakariki who decided to call it Kaicycle, which is cool. So they kind of do a similar scheme but have changed the pricing model to suit better to their community. So the idea is that this is a model that can be adapted. So it's great to see that has been done. Our top 3 challenges, so many challenges. I'm sure people in all the networks here today appreciate we have a lot of the common ones. Team capacity has always been a big one. We're all part-timers. We all have other jobs to pay the bills. It's always a struggle to give people enough hours and pay a decent enough wage to make it a worthwhile job, but then have enough people on the team for backup when people are sick or need holidays. Currently, we have 4 part-timers on the composting team, and it's manageable, but some more backups are good. There's a lot of countless unpaid hours to get us to the point of where we are now. Obviously, when you're doing things that are kind of different, everything just takes so much longer than you think it will. We have limited skills and experience in our team. For example, looking forward to our kind of 5-10 year plan, we need more business model coaching going forward. Lots of things with running a small business that we need to draw on external support from. For money, funding, the infrastructure, the tools, the equipment that we need for small scale composting and urban agriculture often don't exist yet or are not available in New Zealand. We've got limited options, or they're expensive, or all of the, or several of the above. So there is a need for R&D funding in this space. Our model is based on sustaining the operational costs. Obviously, we need to find external funding for setup and expansion. In the last couple of years, we've been lucky to do fairly well for funding. So now it's other barriers that we're running into, like our legislation. So in some of Wellington's district plan zones, composting is not accounted for. So it falls through the cracks and needs to go through a resource consenting process. This is a lot of work and expensive for, say, a compost hub that's only ever going to serve 50 households. $2,000 to $5,000 to set that up just isn't viable. So I could go into more detail, but I won't at this stage because I think we'll do some workshopping on that. But weather also a bit of a challenge sometimes. Yeah, it's hard work, but it's good work. And we are lucky to be in the position that we're in, and we do have a lot of opportunities. Finding customers isn't a challenge. Finding staff is a lot of people who want to work with us, which is amazing. And we're lucky to enjoy a high level public support and support from this emerging nationwide network of people doing similar things. So really want to shout out to everyone else doing this mahi, because together we can do it better. So thank you so much. I thought I'd just chuck a couple links in there. If anyone is interested in the Kaicycle kind of model as it stands, I did a presentation at Zero Waste Network Hui last year, which is the last link there, and that's kind of goes into more detail if anyone's interested. But yeah, thank you again, kia ora.
Kia ora, Kate. Awesome stuff. We are again sort of running behind time, so I think we'll just have about 10 minutes of a few questions for everyone, and I've got a few questions for all of you that I'm interested in all of your responses to. If anyone has kind of specific questions for Kate and Liz and Betsy, you know, please feel free to chuck them in the chat and we can try to answer them on the chat. But one thing I wanted to ask all of you, Kate, Liz and Betsy and David, is, you know, more and more councils around Aotearoa are introducing organic waste services. It's obviously becoming a higher priority. So I'm interested in, you know, what could you anticipate what the impact would be if all of a sudden a really large provider started, you know, was awarded a contract from the council to collect, you know, the waste in your city or district? And also, what, you know, would you yourself, your project, your enterprise be in a position to take on a contract like that? And if not, what would you need to be able to do that?
Hi, Liam and everyone. This is Betsy here. The council is talking about rolling out a curbside collection for residential food scraps. Our program is only limited to commercial, so it would not affect us that much. If the council decided that wanted us to do residential and commercial, then yes, we could scale up and we'd be keen to do that.
Oh, yeah, I'll jump in on that one. So it depends. I think it depends entirely on what the contract looks like. I think the way I don't know. Yeah, it depends. It could either stifle other providers, or it would be really great to see contracting that could be designed to support a diversity of systems that build greater resilience and have broader positive outcomes. I think the risk with a large long-term organic waste collection to a large provider is that it does create a lock-in effect. So it could work against, or not. There are potentially better ways of moving faster up the waste hierarchy and yeah, creating co-benefits rather than just diversion from landfill. Obviously, diversion from landfill is pressing, as it's a lot of emissions, but if we can consider kind of emissions more broadly and looking at the overall carbon impact of our society, does that look different? Does that make it look different in terms of what options for organics more preferable. I'm not sure, but I would say that a diversity of systems would be better overall. Also, maybe in terms of the resilience and supply chain disruption and COVID, there's always a risk to putting all your eggs in one basket, right? So, yeah.
Totally, yeah. So yeah, no, that's a great point, and that's actually our third topic, our third breakout session. We're going to look at what would a diversity of systems in one community look like, and how might different scales and different models fit together. So if you're interested in carrying on that conversation, please do join the third breakout session. Liz, did you have thoughts on that? You know, I know you've kind of worked with your council for a long time, you know, and maybe had a few challenges with them, with the organics collection.
Yes, yeah, it has been difficult. We've kind of been dragging them forwards at a pace to consider organic waste diversion and minimisation, you know, than they're actually ready to do. So it's a little bit different. It's unlikely that they would give the contract to another provider because, you know, we're in a remote space and we have secure, well, relatively secure, recently negotiated long-term contracts for the other services. Our organics diversions are not secure completely yet. We're getting there, but it's unlikely they'd actually give it to another provider because of transport costs, etc. would be crazy, and we would be very, if it did happen, well, that would be a real bolt out of the blue, and yeah, we would lose a lot, like our community would lose a lot, and I think there would be a groundswell against it. So but I think I totally support what Kate says about, you know, diversity of solutions, and I would encourage all local bodies and municipal councils to work closely with their communities to find solutions, and because it's the most, you know, you are going to find the most carbon efficient solutions by working locally, and I think it would be great that councils engage more closely with the communities to find solutions, the diversity.
Yeah, awesome. One other issue that has come up a lot in all of your presentations is around emissions, and obviously, you know, a lot of us know one of the biggest benefits of diverting organic waste from landfill is reducing emissions from landfill and composting it instead. But I know Betsy and David did touch on, you know, there are other issues around how we actually reduce emissions with our ways that we process or organic resources. And so I'm interested in your thoughts on, you know, how do your systems try to incorporate emissions reductions, and what more do you think, you know, could be done in this space to achieve sort of climate change emissions reductions? And perhaps starting again with Betsy to sort of go into a bit more detail, you know, how does your sort of on-farm in situ composting system address these issues?
Thank you, Liam. So I suppose most of you have seen the book called Drawdown, which lists the top 100 actions humanity can take to reverse climate change. And number 3 on that list is reducing food waste. And it's not just keeping food scraps out of landfill, it's actually looking at our entire food system, where how we grow our food, how we transport it, how we package it. And so whenever you have local food production, you address that entire system. But in terms of how our system also looks at climate change mitigation, when you improve topsoil, you improve growing conditions. And we're under the impression that the best way to reverse climate change is to use the natural systems, the plants and the soil and the trees, to take the carbon out and store it. And this concept of terra preta, this black earth that they talk about from Brazil is kind of the holy grail of both climate change, regenerative agriculture, and healthy local food production. It's a type of soil that it's incredibly rich in carbon, incredibly rich in nutrients, and incredibly able to hold on to water and grow things in a very permanent sort of way. So that's what we're trying to create. And if we can do that, then the plants will be taking the carbon out of the atmosphere, pumping it into the soil, and we're inoculating the bananas and everything else we plant with something called AMF, which is a type of beneficial fungi that will take the starches and sugars that plants are pumping down through their roots into the soil and turn it into a very stable carbon form. And we could talk for a long time about that, but we're trying to create a soil that actually acts as a carbon sink. And we think Terra Preta will do that. So that is a very, very big part of what we're trying to accomplish. And we're finding that there's very little research done. There's lots of research being done, but nothing really concrete enough to be used yet because of the complexity of measuring soil carbon. But it definitely is one of the main aspects of what we're trying to accomplish and what we're doing by in situ on farm composting. I guess I should stop there. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that's great. That's really comprehensive and yeah, fascinating. I mean, you kind of need a whole session to just talk about those issues, right? And there's lots of really great discussions in the chat as well going on around that and other things too. Kate and Liz, did you have any thoughts on climate change and emissions reduction sort of issues on top of what Betsy's said? Okay.
To you, Liz.
Okay, Liz, you're on mute.
I just had to turn off the noisy heater, which is probably not doing much for our emissions. Or I think in our system, we're always looking at reducing our emissions and tweaking, right through our actual compost process to, striving towards electric vehicles for pickups of all of our curbside collections. One of the things we hope is, that we plan to work with our councillors that by removing the organics from the general collection, that we can actually reduce our rubbish collections to bi-weekly, and therefore take out a whole week of driving around picking up rubbish. So there's lots and lots of little systems, things like that we're working on. It would be great to have food waste in the ETS system somehow, and I think Rick Thorpe on our teams works with MFE on that a little bit. So I don't know a lot about the ETS at the moment. Yeah, supporting local food production has a whole lot of tips of reducing transport for food, and what else did I have? Yeah, reducing packaging, etc., etc. Yeah, that's all from me.
Nice one. Maybe Kate, did you want to just maybe talk about your BAM composting and kind of the emissions sort of point of composting in that way?
Yeah, sure. We're really interested in kind of different composting methods and the results of those in terms of emissions profiles, compost like kind of efficiency of converting starting materials into finished soil and then finished compost, sorry, and then how that interacts with soil, because there's opportunity to improve carbon emission footprint all through the process, right? In so many ways. So something we have been experimenting with and are still kind of working on optimizing is using beneficial anaerobic composting methods, actually adding specific biology into the composting system to kind of try and pathway composting processes away from methane, away from gas production, and further towards like improving efficiency of converting carbon into humus building blocks instead of being released as gas, and turning our piles less frequently, because every time you turn a pile, you release odor, but you also release more carbon gets emitted, in short. So that's kind of the journey we're on, is trying to, we used to turn up Walla piles a lot, like twice a week, which was really backbreaking work. So in terms of also becoming scalable and not annoying the neighbors, like it was important to turn less. And that's got other great outcomes, like creating more compost, reducing emissions, producing better compost. The less you turn, also the better fungal life you have in the compost. So we're seeing better biodiversity of our compost since we started turning less. Still definitely on that journey. That's something we're doing. In terms of improving our emissions reduction, or achieving better climate change outcomes, we'd just love to be able to scale and just get more food waste out of landfill, get it through localized composting and into local soils to, as Liz was saying, foster urban food systems, which have so many other carbon benefits. So what we really feel like we need to be able to do that would really help with that is have some kind of pre-processing system where we can really have more control over the parameters, so retain as much carbon as possible, keep temperatures as low as possible while still pasteurizing, killing weed seeds, and supporting healthy biodiversity. So that's something we're really interested in, as opposed to like a kind of, I don't know, like a hot rot system where volume of reduction is like a what they strive for. It's like we want to keep all that resource and convert it as best as possible. I better stop there.
Yeah, that's awesome, Kate. So many interesting things to go into that. I feel like we need a whole session on emissions and carbon and composting. But we just have about 15 minutes or so now left for some breakout sessions. Not as long as we hoped for, but really keen to get these discussions and these ideas we've been bringing up and give you all the chance to talk to each other about them. But we've decided to sort of split into 3 rooms and have 3 separate topics for each room that you'll focus on. We do have a range of other prompts if you're interested to look at those too, but we probably don't have a lot of time. But so the 3 topics are, the first one is looking at opportunities for circularity with organic waste and food systems, which we've heard quite a bit about. So that will be breakout room 1. Betsy and David will be in there and some others. So if you're interested in that conversation, join room 1. The second topic is, how can your local council support local scale organic waste enterprises and initiatives, and how do you make those relationships work? So that will be room 2. And we'll have Kate in there, and I think Daughter will go into that one as well. The third topic is, what would an ecosystem of different types and scales of organic waste services look like? How can different systems complement each other? So that will be, is that room 3, Daughter? Yep, and yeah. Liz and maybe myself will go into that one. So yeah, take your pick. You get to choose your own breakout room.
All right, Liam, you'll be on mute because everybody gets muted, but do you want to wrap up?
Yeah, I guess just one thing to say is, kind of bringing it back to the intention that I raised at the beginning, which was, what can we do to support the kind of work that we're all doing in our different spaces, and how do we support the kinds of projects we heard from today, and how we can achieve those other outcomes that we've been talking about in terms of emissions reduction, carbon sequestration, building food systems, and ensuring the systems kind of do benefit local communities. So we'd really love to sort of have your feedback on that. The Trello board is open. You can write your thoughts and feedback on that after the session. Doesn't have to be within the next 3 minutes. So yeah, really interested in what we can do, how we can go forward with this as a network and support each other, and maybe some brainstorming. Maybe there's a need for some kind of working group or something like that, where we actually progress these conversations, so that we're not off just all doing our own kind of mahi on our own, but we have some support with these conversations. So yeah, that's kind of the main point I thought would be good to end it on. But thank you everyone for all your contributions. There were some real lively chats going on there in text form, which was great to see. Always wish we could have more time to have more of these kōrero, but it's been a real pleasure. And thanks again to Kate, to Liz, Betsy and David for your kōrero. Thank you, Jenny, for giving us an update of what's happening at the government policy level. Thanks again, Daughter, Izzy, Ali, for your support and making this all happen. And for everyone else for coming and being part of this kōrero. So have a wonderful day. Not sure if there's anything else to remind.
No more sessions today, but the video will go onto the website probably a day later, I think we're working on. We've got 2 sessions tomorrow, one at 11 talking about container return systems, and then our AGM at 1 o'clock, just the best event of the year. And then Friday again, it sounds like we're going to have an early start because James Shaw, our keynote speaker, needs to, I think, come a bit earlier. But yeah, we're going to be talking about climate change, and that is super relevant to the conversations on organic. So hopefully see you tomorrow and Friday as well. Thanks,
Can I
everyone.
make one more plug, Daughter? Just if anyone's really interested in carrying on the conversation at a sort of a higher level, there is an event happening on Saturday as part of Organic Week, Saturday at 4 p.m. If you check out the Soil and Health Association or the Organic Week NZ Facebook page, there's an event listing there where we're going to sort of talk about more sort of organic waste policy kind of priorities and hear from some local government people and stuff like that. So, and a chance to further these conversations even more if you're interested. So anyway, kia ora everyone. Thank you.
Bye.